Hi. I'm so excited for this podcast today. I have Kathryn Severns Avery with me. And even though we just met, it just feels like we've been connected for a long time. And she's just has a special place in my heart. I'm going to let you mostly tell us about you, but she's written multiple books. She founded Restoration Ranch, which is a place for first responders to come, and it's a 40-acre ranch where they can just get away for reflection and relaxation. And it's a place to take care of the people who take care of us, which we don't really know what they go through. And after surviving a traumatic event, this is what Kathryn did, and all kinds of other wonderful things. So I'm super happy to have you. And we've
Thank
been having
you.
great conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. So, since we're talking about grief, I think that grief is something that I am well acquainted with. I had what I'll call super major traumatic event happened in my life when I was 22, and my mom was involved in a single car automobile accident and was in a persistent vegetative state for 4.5 years before she finally passed. What was interesting was that was also the first experience I had with intuition. And I find that intuition and grief are often intertwined. But many times we don't pay attention to the messages because we don't understand what they are. And when I hear people say, well, I'm just not intuitive, yeah, you are. It's part of your reptilian brain. You don't have a choice. We are hardwired to perceive messages and danger signals from our environment. And doesn't mean that intuition is necessarily trying to tell us stuff negative. It's just trying to get our attention. So the night before my mom had her accident, we had a phone conversation, and I was a total spoiled brat on that conversation. I was upset because I was coming home at Christmas without a boyfriend, and my sister had a boyfriend, and my brother was married, and my mom had my dad, and I had no one. And I mean, I was just like playing that violin for everything that it was worth. And my mom said, wow, I didn't know it bothered you. Well, it does. So we hung up, and this voice went off in my head. I don't know how to describe it. It's not like I hear people talking, but it's a persistent thought that could be perceived as a voice.
Mhm.
And it said, call her back. And I was like, I just talked to her. Why would I do that? Call her back. Call her back now. And it got to the point where it was so insistent. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll call her back. And my mom answered the phone, and I said, I forgot to tell you two things. One, how much I'm looking forward to coming home for Christmas. And two, how much I love you. And those turned out to be the last words I ever uttered to my mom. And I think how different my life would be if at 22 years of age, which I was at the time, I had not had that closure. How much more profound my grief experience would have been. And it was horrific. I mean, I look at that as kind of like the granddaddy of everything that's happened in my life. And I would say that one took me a decade to get through.
Oh.
And as you know, grief is something that is not really discussed in our culture,
Mhm.
not embraced. And so the work that you are doing, Julie, to demystify, make it more mainstream, to help us understand that it will not consume us and swallow us up into a hole that we can never get out of, which it feels like when you're in grief. But we have to take steps, and we have to understand the process of how we move forward. So that was my first experience in that. And as I said, I went off the deep end. That was when I developed a serious eating disorder. Everything in my life was out of control, but I could control what went into my mouth. And was lucky enough to have encountered a therapist who said to me, "You lose another ounce, and I mean literally another ounce, and I will have you in an inpatient program because you are in danger of dying." I didn't understand that. I was very much involved in I'll call it a 12-step weight loss program
Mhm.
that was rewarding my anorexic and bulimic behavior.
Mm.
Wow, you're losing weight. You look so good.
Really good.
No. And I just became the poster child for, yeah, I look great on the inside and I am devastated and falling apart. I look great on the outside. I'm devastated and falling apart on the inside. And that was, golly, 50 years ago?
Mm.
No, not quite, 40
But
years ago.
yeah.
But still, our understanding of grief and the conversation around grief just wasn't happening.
Mhm.
So, was that your experience as well?
Well, my experience was that I wouldn't shut up about it. So, yeah, but yeah, prior to that, definitely, I think we live in a death phobic culture.
Mhm.
We're youth obsessed and we
Mhm.
kind of push the elderly aside, and death happens in a vacuum. It happens in the hospital. It doesn't happen in the home as it did for how many
Right.
thousands of years before
Yeah.
our modern culture. And we don't have rituals around it that guide
Yes.
us through. And we're told, get over it. It's been 3 months. Why are you still crying? It can take a couple of years. It could take like a
Uh-huh.
decade. You were 22. And one of the things you said is because you had that conversation, I think part of what made it less horrible than it could have been is that you didn't have the guilt because you did have that conversation. I think when you
Right.
add guilt to grief, it's just
Oh,
a perfect storm for not recovering. It-
correct.
you
And
know?
it can literally be lethal. And I think about that because when again, I've been lucky enough to have great therapists because I've had multiple deaths that I've had to process. But to understand the difference between guilt and shame, guilt is there's something wrong with this situation. Shame is there's something wrong with me.
Well,
And being able to say, yes, I didn't experience guilt because I did have that conversation. But more importantly, I wasn't shaming myself either, because that just adds a whole nother layer of what's wrong with me.
mm,
And then once again, we start looking for external solutions. Well, maybe this program will have what I need, or maybe this shopping experience will finally make me feel good about myself, or maybe this relationship will fill that big empty void that I am experiencing because I'm not allowing myself to feel the emotions. And more importantly, I don't know how to process the emotions that we've been so lucky to finally start to answer some of those questions. So, what are some of your favorite getting through guilt tool and getting through grief tools?
Getting through
Both of
grief.
those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both of those. Well, grief was my guide, I would say, after losing my mom, especially my mom. My dad a year later, but my mom and we had more of a bond, right? So
Mhm.
grief just wasn't going to let me off the hook. I cried for a year off and on. Things would trigger it, but I kind of had a sense that there was no way but through, and I wanted to get through. And one of the things I did was it was music. Music was huge for me. I had my farewell playlist, and there were days where I just had to completely be alone, go into the playlist, let it bring up all the memories and all the feelings and just cry it out,
Mhm.
which would be frowned upon in general in our
Yeah.
culture. But that was huge for me. And because I did it, I did reach a point where I did not feel like I was in grief anymore. And I would say it took about a year. And
Yeah.
because I think of it as tears are water, water is emotion in motion,
Yeah.
and it
Yep.
has to flow. Otherwise, you are going to
Yes.
feel like you're drowning in it. It's just going to
Yeah.
get deeper and you'll feel like you can't get out. And the fear, I think, that stops people from sort of diving in is what you said, what it's going to consume me. I'm never
Right.
going to come out of this if I let myself feel it, which is
Yeah.
the total opposite of what helps.
And I know that at that point in time, I was just in so much pain. I wanted the pain to end. And I actually had suicidal ideation. And I remember calling my sister and just saying, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to hurt like this anymore. And I think I'm just going to leave. And God love her. And I talked with her about this later, and she didn't remember this conversation at all. But what she said to me was, okay, if you want to kill yourself, fine, go ahead. But before you do that, I want you to explain to my 2-year-old daughter who worships you why you aren't going to be here going forward.
Oh, that's powerful.
And
Oh,
that stopped me because what I now understand is that suicide is often a permanent solution to a temporary situation and set of feelings. We just don't want to hurt anymore.
yeah.
But we don't really have, I mean, yes, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did a great job with identifying the 5 stages of grief, but those were for people who were terminally ill. It
Yes.
was not a general guide for, okay, how do we get through this process? And now, 40 some years later, I look at what I have learned and I clearly see a path forward, not only for me with my most recent experience, but it will work for anyone, whether your grief is capital G grief or small grief, tiny g grief, because every ending is likely to trigger grief, whether it's the ending of a relationship, the ending of a job, the ending of a career, the ending of a home that you live in. Those are all things that bring up the sadness, the loss, and the confusion that we feel when something that's important to us disappears.
Yeah. And I think the longing too for what
Yes.
I think in a lot of situations, like, oh, you lost your job, you wouldn't even, I think, necessarily say, oh, I'm grieving that loss
Right.
because
Right.
it's not
Yeah.
thought of that way.
Right, exactly. It's like, "Oh, wow, that really sucks to be you." And, rather than, "Oh, yeah, that" when you look at the amount of time and the structure that a job provides in our life and the rhythm of, I work for 5 days and I have 2 days off if you're a typical employee, and you're in sync with the rest of the world, and then suddenly you're not, and you experience the panic of, "Oh my god, how am I gonna pay my bills? Oh my god, how am I gonna support my family? Oh my god, how am I going to?" And that's when we get caught up in that loop that just keeps us churning, but does not move us forward at
Mm-mm.
all.
No, that makes me think of your book,
Yeah, your countdown to retirement,
Countdown.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yes, yeah. And so it's been an interesting experience. The second major loss that I went through is by far, I would say, the hardest. It was my 14-year-old nephew. He was 13 when he was diagnosed. He was a insulin-dependent diabetic, and so often had headaches when his blood sugar was low. And so there was one summer where he had tons of headaches. And we just thought, oh, okay, we're not regulating him very well. Well, that was right up until he had a grand mal seizure and ended up in the emergency room. And we discovered that he had a malignant brain tumor the size of a plum. and he's 14. Yeah, he's 13. He's a teenager. He has everything in life to look forward to. And then this happens. And yet, the grace, the wisdom, the dignity that he had through this process blew my mind. My sister and her husband had relocated from just outside of Philadelphia to central Massachusetts in the January before John was diagnosed. So they're new to the community. They don't have a great support system. And I was single at the time. I hadn't gotten married yet. And I literally would fly back east for 2 weeks to help out and then fly back home. I was teaching piano at the time and was fortunate to work with very affluent families in the Denver, Colorado area. And they supported me so I could do that. They basically paid me for piano lessons I didn't deliver because they knew what was going on.
Yeah.
So during that same time, my sister kept on having these recurring pains in her lower right side. And she said, "You've had appendicitis. What is it like?" I said, "Stabbing pain, lower right side." So she went to her physician and they were like, "No, you don't have, there's nothing going on with your appendix. This is probably psychosomatic caused by the stress of your son's illness, blah, blah, blah." So,
Mhm.
like I said, John was diagnosed in August of 2000. And then the following July, my sister ended up in the ER because she was in such excruciating pain. And they did a CAT scan. And I remember Barb said to me, "I knew I was screwed when the x ray tech came out and said, 'I thought you said you had a hysterectomy.'" And she said, "I did." And she said, "I knew at that point I had a tumor the size of a uterus."
My
It's,
God. Oh,
yeah.
no. And her son is going through this at
Her
the same
son is
time.
dying, and she is diagnosed with recurrent endometrial cancer that had eaten through her abdominal wall and into her colon. And so she's going through chemotherapy. At the same time, her son is doing experimental therapies because everything that they had at that point in time for a anaplastic astrocytoma, which was the type of malignant brain tumor that he had, wasn't working. And I remember watching this 13-year-old boy taking medicine that we had no idea what the potential side effects were or could be. And he was so amazingly brave and just said, "Aunt Kath, it may not save me, but it may save somebody else."
Oh, well,
That's just who this child was. He was amazing.
wow.
And so John died in August. I am with my sister at a chemotherapy session, and we knew that John was getting close to death. But Barbara was trying to preserve her life, so she's doing her chemo treatment. She had a 16-year-old daughter at the time, and of course, wanted to be around for Suzanne's.
Mhm.
And I remember I had made a playlist of stuff for her to listen to while she's doing her chemo. And I'm sitting with Barb, and all of a sudden she just like shake and her eyes open. And she's like, "Did you just see that?" And I said, "See what?" She said, "There was this enormous bright light." And I was like, "No, I didn't." And then out of the corner of my eye, I see her doctor and a nurse walking towards us with a phone.
Oh,
And John was dying. And she had to say goodbye over the phone because we didn't know that we could get home in time.
oh my God.
So they disconnect her from her chemo. She's like, "I don't care. I'm not done. I'm going home." And I told the nurse what entrance of the building to take my sister to. I ran and got the car. Well, she took her to the wrong entrance.
Oh my
So I'm
God.
waiting and waiting and waiting. And then finally I'm like, shit, she's not here. She went someplace else. So I finally find my sister and I am racing to get to the house. And there is a bridge that goes over Lake Quinman. It doesn't matter. I can't remember the name of it. It's right outside of Worcester. And our car is going over the bridge and it stops. It turns off.
What?
Yes. We have just enough momentum to get off the bridge and into a parking lot. And I'm trying the car and I'm trying the car and it will not start. And I am slamming my hands on the steering wheel going, got to get. And my sister said, we're not supposed to be there.
Mm.
And I went, what? And she said, Kath, we're not supposed to be there.
Oh.
And so after she said that, I just looked at her and I turned the ignition. The car started and we finished the drive home and he had just died.
My God. Ah, you can't make that stuff up.
You can't. You can't. And then my sister passed away the following February. And she did die at home. We had a hospital bed in the living room so that she could look out. They lived on a pond. She could see the pond. And I remember that day so clearly because I had been up with her all night long. And I remember looking at her eye and starting to see a little pinprick of black outside of her pupil. And I just intuitively knew she's having a brain bleed. And so my brother-in-law was like, look, you're exhausted. Go get some sleep. And so I went and I laid down and I had just this very vivid dream of Barbara and me running from something that was chasing us. And then I just woke up and went out and she was in the death process. I was able to be with her when she died. And then, I've heard the term keening. I did not know what that was until I did it because after she passed, there was a sound that came from my gut that I don't even know how to describe as other than a howl.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't talk about that in our culture. We don't acknowledge that in our
No,
culture.
we don't. And
Yeah.
caning is a ritual in a lot of cultures that can go on for days.
Yes. Yes.
Get that out of you. It's just like it's emotional, it's biological, it's everything. It's this severing of us,
Right.
this
Yes.
connection that's just
Yeah.
like gut
Yeah.
wrenching, literally.
It is. And when Barbara was sick, before I flew home for what was, the time that she passed, I woke up one morning and I literally felt like I was being drawn and quartered. Like parts of me were just like, it hurt. And I rolled out of bed onto the floor, crawled into the bathroom, and thought, I've got to get in the tub. And turn on the water. So I do that, and finally I'm like able to function. I get out of the shower, and I had a watch that had been missing for months. And I went back into my bedroom, and I'm getting dressed, and I look over at my dresser, and on top of my jewelry box sits the watch. And I picked it up and literally was thinking, I wonder what it's time for, when my phone rang and it was my brother-in-law saying, get on the next plane. And I thought, wow. So intuition has always played an important part in my grief process and my knowing about death. So let's fast forward. There are other deaths that happened in my family. I'm the only surviving member. I lost my best friend as well. So let's fast forward to December 4th of 2020. And I am very happily married at that time. I got married at 49 and Chris and I met by a total fluke. We had a mutual acquaintance who invited us both to come down and listen to jazz. It was not a setup, but we discovered that we really liked each other and had a lot in common and started dating. And I remember telling my girlfriends, I don't think he's Mr. Right, but he's a really good Mr. Right now. And then thinking, who else is ever going to like make you laugh this hard or have this much in common with you or make you feel so grounded? And that was when I realized, oh, what you've been looking for is not what you need. And we got married, and we had been married for 13 years. And the morning of December 4th, we were getting ready to go into another COVID lockdown. Chris and I realized we needed to get groceries. So we made our grocery list. And before trying to figure out what we're doing, we're having our house is being remodeled. I am the caretaker for my father, who is now living 3 doors down from us. He had been living with us. Those are kind of just ancillary details, but I had been working on an 8-foot angel as part of a holiday lighting display. I had won our neighborhood's competition 2 years in a row, and Chris was like, "Go for a hat trick, honey." So I'm making this enormous angel, and I had come in, and Chris came downstairs, and we're having coffee talking about the day. And we had a fight a couple of weeks previously. And because I was running a business, taking care of my dad, it's COVID. I just like, Chris isn't getting a lot of attention.
Mhm.
And so he reached out to a childhood friend who he had been romantically involved with before he met me. And I remember saying to him, I don't really care if she calls you, but I'm not real happy if you call her. He's like, don't worry, I won't do that. Well, 2 weeks before this particular day, I had come home from running an errand. He's on the phone and I hear her voice. And so I was like, hey, wrap up the conversation. I need to talk to you. And I hear him say, well, I got to go. And she says, it was really nice hearing from you, Chris. Thanks for calling. Um, I was pissed. I mean, the capital P pissed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had a fight, and it took us a couple of days to get like back to our regular rhythm. But that morning, that voice goes off again and it says, you need to apologize. I'm like, for what? It's like, you need to apologize for that conversation you had about his conversation. I was like, no, I don't. And it's like yelling at me. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
So as Chris is sitting at our island, I said, I owe you an apology. And he's like, for what? And I said, hey, this woman plays an important role in your life. You have childhood memories together you have with no one else. If you want to talk to her, you call and speak to her anytime. And Chris stood up and walked over to me, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, Kathryn, I love only you.
Oh, thank you.
And so we embraced, and I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. And then we went back to the grocery list and everything else. And Chris is gathering up his stuff to go, and that voice goes off in my head again and says, make sure you kiss him goodbye.
Okay.
So I went up and kissed him on the back of the neck, and I said, do you know how much I love you? And he said, yeah, I do. I'll be back soon. Those were our last words to each other. He was at an intersection. The light turned green. 3 robbery suspects had just robbed a store. There was a high-speed chase. They were fleeing from police through a residential neighborhood, and they ran the red light and T-boned our car, and Chris died at the scene.
Oh, no.
And
Oh,
just like with my mom,
yeah.
it was like there was no guilt because I had said what needed to be said, and we had closure. Our relationship, there was nothing left unsaid between us. And I realize how fortunate I am because most people don't get that.
That's a huge blessing in disguise. I mean, when you heard the voice, did you have that thought? Like, is this the same voice I heard when my mom?
Oh, I know it really well. 'Cause it
Yeah, yeah, I
happens
was
to me
gonna
a
say.
lot.
Yeah.
Yes. I've often said, if that voice told me to take off all my clothes and do naked backflips down the highway, I would do it because I knew there was a reason.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not sure what the consequences of that would be, but I would know that you need to do this.
Yes.
I was out in the garage working on my angel, and at 3 minutes after 2 o'clock, my entire body shook. And I went, something just happened to Chris. And it was like, no, he just went to pick up groceries. He'll be back. And then not 5 minutes later, I hear sirens. I hear a helicopter. And I'm like, wow, wonder what's going on.
God. Oh,
An hour goes by and I'm like, where is he? And I start texting and phoning, no response. And I thought, that little booger is out Christmas shopping and I'm not happy.
mm,
And then that same voice said, do not be mad at him.
wow.
And I was like, okay, that's weird. And it got to be more than 2 hours. And I thought, this is really not right. So I called the non emergency number for our police department and was patched through to a gentleman who I assumed, was like every cop we see on a cop show, sitting at a desk, just the facts, ma'am, just give me the info.
Right? Eating donuts.
Donuts, having coffee.
Yeah.
And he asked me about the make and model of our car. He asked me a description of my husband. He wanted the license plate. I couldn't remember that, but we're just talking and he's like, I promise I will keep you informed. Then it got to be 3.5 hours. It's starting to get dark. And I thought, well, Chris is a big guy. Maybe he had a medical emergency. I should go to the grocery store to see if I can find our car. By the grace of God, I did not take the route that he had taken. So I did not come across the crash scene. I went up and down every aisle in the parking lot, didn't find our car, went over to the grocery pickup door and said, did my husband get groceries this afternoon? And they said, no, he never came. Do you still want them? That was when I knew he was dead. And I got the groceries and I stopped and I called Commander Bates and I said, I just picked up the groceries that Chris never got. I don't think he's alive. And I have another friend who's an intuitive, and I called her and I'm like, Rochelle, this is what's happening. I said, what are you getting from this? And she just started to sob and she said, Kath, it's really good. And I said, he's dead, isn't he? And she just sobbed. So I also didn't watch the news that night, or I would have watched my husband die on television because they were running the surveillance footage from the convenience store at that intersection.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so about 8 o'clock at night, there's a knock on my door. And I heard voices outside, and I thought, well, that's weird. It's awfully late for solicitors. And so I opened the door. Of course, it's COVID. Everybody's in masks. And I put one on. And they're, Mrs. Avery, may we come in? And that voice in my head said, you better be sitting down. So I walked over to where Chris had been sitting at the island that morning and I looked at them and I said, is he dead? And they said, yes, we're so sorry. It was a traffic accident. I had called a friend who was a therapist and told her what was going on. And she's like, do you want me to come over? And I was like, yeah. She literally trailed in right behind them, and I was so grateful
Ouch.
because as they're telling me things, all I hear is wah, wah, wah. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just like a Charlie Brown movie. I'm like,
Yeah.
this isn't making any sense.
Oh,
And so thank God Barbara was there taking notes. I watched one of them get a phone call, go into our office, close the door, take the phone call, and come out about 15 minutes later. And he said, I'm now at liberty to tell you what happened. I was
mm,
like, oh, there's more to the story. And that was when I learned that there had been a robbery. The suspects had fled at a high rate of speed. When they started driving the wrong way down a major thoroughfare, the chase was called off, but they still continued to go at a high rate of speed. And that Chris never saw him coming. And I know that because it took me a year, but I did watch the surveillance footage. His eyes were always straight ahead. So I was like, at least I know he didn't know what hit. So yeah, that was kind of crazy. And the number of people who asked me if I was going to sue the Lakewood, Colorado Police Department was appalling. When I said, why would I do that? It's like, well, there was a high speed chase. Yes, which they called off. Well, you could get a lot of money and that will bring my dead husband back. Why would I do that? They were just doing their job. So when word got out that I was not going to sue the police department, and in fact, when contacted by the media, I wrote them a letter saying, if you want pictures that you're not stealing off my Facebook page and my website and everything else, I'll give you pictures, but I want to know that you read this letter first. And they asked me if I would narrate it as part of their coverage. And so I did that. And I asked the community to do acts of service for people suffering from the effects of COVID in memory of Chris. And I literally got notes from hundreds of people on what they had done to honor my husband.
Well, that's
Yeah. So,
beautiful.
yeah. And then it's Christmas morning. My dad is living 3 doors down from us. I couldn't bear to be in our house without Chris. It was just too painful. And I'll go to what happened on Christmas Day, but I want to talk about what was different about this grief experience. Because when the grief would come, it felt like a tsunami. And it was like you're about to get whacked. And my therapist said, Kath, when that happens, turn into a cork because a cork will always pop up to the top of the wave and it will not take you out. And so I would like turn into the cork, I'd feel the wave. And then it was like, remember to breathe through this. And I would sob uncontrollably, but breathe. And then I would feel it start to dissipate. Yeah, that was the first time that happened for me. Normally, I would push it down, push it down, push it down, push it down, and it would just pop up everywhere. Yeah. But this time I'm going to go through it. I am not going to run from it. So on Christmas Day, I'm staying with my dad. He has a caretaker who's there helping us. I'm in the shower. There's a knock on the door. The caretaker says, I'm really sorry to bother you, but there's a Lakewood police officer at your front door. And I started to panic because I had nieces and nephews living in the area. And I was like, oh, F
No.
no, we are not
No.
going through this again. And I said, I'm in the shower. And she said, yeah, he says he'll wait. And then I really started to panic.
My God.
So I get out, my hair is dripping wet. I throw on clothes. I look like shit. I go and I open the front door, and what I see almost drops me to my knees because parked in front of my dad's house are 6 Lakewood PD cruisers with their lights on and guys standing at parade rest coming to check on me to see how I'm doing. Oh, and I was like, I still think about that. They could have taken the time to go home and be with their families.
Morning.
They came to be with me to make sure I was okay. And I ran back inside. I said, don't move. And my friend Rochelle had sent me a sweet picture of Chris taken at our vacation home in Maine. Chris is fast asleep and he's got his arms like this and he's holding our cat Grady. And Grady's got like this very strange look on his face, like this is super uncomfortable, but he's asleep and I'm not moving. And I brought that out because I recognized at least 2 of the 6 people there were officers who had been on scene at Chris's accident or at the crime scene. I want you to remember my husband, not what you saw that day. Every one of them took a picture of that picture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The way that you turned it around, people telling you to sue and then asking for acts of service. It's
Milestone birthday.
remarkable.
Yeah. So that following April, Chris would have had his milestone birthday, and I didn't want to spend it alone. And so I called the commander that I had talked to on the day that he was killed and asked if I could bring food from Chris's favorite restaurants to roll call. And he was like, yeah, sure. Sounds good. So the day before I call and I say, okay, where do I show up and when? And he's like, oh, you're really going to do that? So I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, well, oftentimes people say stuff like this, but they never follow through. I'm like, you'll learn I'm a woman who follows through. So I went and we're in roll call. Unbeknownst to me, the day before, a 14-year-old boy had stabbed his mother 30 times. And the officer first on scene is in roll call talking about what happened in graphic and uncensored language. And I'm like, why is he at work? And I just,
Yeah.
why is he at work? So when I asked command staff, they said, well, he doesn't want to be at home by himself thinking about this. He may not want or need mental health counseling at this point in time. And there's no other place for him to go. And I thought, that is so wrong. I need to do something about that. So that was in April. The previous month, March, my dad died. So I lost Chris in December. My dad died in March. So 4 months apart. And being the only surviving child, I was the sole inheritor. And I chose to use the majority of my inheritance to start a nonprofit, to create a place for first responders to go, to take care of themselves. We're not a mental health facility. We're basically an Airbnb for first responders that they don't have to pay to go to on 40 acres of private land. They are the only people who are on site other than our ranch caretakers, which is a unique experience because, yes, they may get a donated vacation or take a vacation, but they have to deal with other human beings and they may not want to do that. So, by creating this place for people to go, it's my way to honor Chris and to say thank you to my first responder angels who were with him and tended to him. Now, remember the guy that I talked to when I called in and the non emergency number?
Uh huh.
He was with my husband when he died. It took him a year to tell me that.
And so he knew. When you were speaking with him on the phone, he already knew.
He literally had my husband's blood on his hands and clothes. Yeah.
But he couldn't tell you because
Did
he
not
wasn't
tell
allowed
me.
to tell you, or he just
Correct.
wasn't.
Was not allowed to tell me. It took him a year and it came out inadvertently. We were doing a presentation about this ranch that I wanted to open to see if there would be support among the first responder community. And he said something about, yeah, when I was with Chris, and I went, you were with Chris when? And he's like, Kathryn, I was with him when he died. I was like, you were with him? And he's like, yeah. And I can tell you, I could have had 50 pounds of gauze and I could not have stopped the bleeding. And that was how I knew not only was he with my husband, he literally had my husband's blood on him. And I just remember thinking, this is insane. And you know what? And I remember thinking, this wasn't your only call that day. this is something that you go through time after time after time. And I probably am one of maybe a handful of civilians who has been afforded the luxury of staying in touch with the people who cared for my husband. They don't do that. They can't do that. It's too painful.
And the
Yeah.
trauma of this
Yeah.
every day, we don't even think about civil I would not know this
No,
if you
no.
weren't telling me.
And he and another officer came to every sentencing of the three defendants responsible for Chris's death. They have become lifelong friends. They are people that I literally would lay down my life for. And so that is what makes me know that as hard as it is to start and fund and run a nonprofit, I shot my wad buying the ranch and starting the nonprofit. I have no more capital to put into this project. But I am bound and determined it will be successful because of how unique the program is and the fact that I, as I say, educate, advocate, and agitate now on behalf of the first responder community to raise awareness of yes, there are good cops, there are good bad cops, there are good firemen, there are bad firemen. But if you were chronically overworked, overtired, and stressed, would you always make good decisions? Of course not. And yet we hold them to a standard of perfection and of being heroes, which is something that a human is not designed to be because it's a standard of conduct that is not sustainable. And yet we keep on calling them heroes and they hate that
Uh,
because it's like, I'm a human being.
yeah.
And like you,
Yeah.
I go home and I take my work with me, and my family sacrifices and suffers because of what I do to serve and protect and care for the public. I'm like, this is so ass backwards. So I will not let this fail. I just bought another Powerball ticket. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to win. Why would you think about this until you go through it?
Exactly.
It's crazy. And I just did a class this past week at Arapahoe Community College in the criminal justice system. I taught victimology for an afternoon. And what I already knew that it's not a justice system, it's a legal system. And the sooner you understand that, the less angry and frustrated you will be.
Mm.
But what really got me, Julie, was I wanted accurate statistics. So I looked up how much money we in Colorado spend to support victim programs. In 2019, it was a high of $57 million a year. Last year, it was $13 million. That's a two-thirds cut. But then I found a map of how much it costs to incarcerate a prisoner for a year. This is not the people who are in city jails or county jails. This is people who are tried, convicted, and in the state penitentiary system. We spend $75,000 per inmate per year in Colorado to keep them in jail. There are 16,000 people in our penal system, which means we'd spend $1.3 billion a year on convicts, and we spend 13 million to support the people who are picking up their lives from the aftermath of their crimes.
That is so ass backwards.
Yes.
Oh my God. That
So for every dollar you spend for an offender, you spend a fraction of a penny for the victim of their crime. I'm like, oh, hell no, not on my watch.
Lord, happy. I'm speechless. This is so important to raise awareness of
Yes.
this. What you're
Yes.
doing is absolutely amazing. And how can we support your work? Oh my God.
Yeah. And then very quickly, I want to add that unfortunately, the victim advocacy system does not do well with helping victims move through their grief. And it's like it only supports them for so long. And then it's kind of like, fly, be free, go have a good life. And I know that the people who do this work are compassionate and believe in what they're doing, but there is so much more that needs to be done. So we have a website, restorationranchcolorado.com. Make sure to put the Colorado in there or you'll get an alcohol treatment programming. California. That is not us. Or if you go to Colorado Gives, which is the charitable organization that handles donation for charities in the state of Colorado, you can find them there. But we do have a donate button on our website. If you know people who have properties and are thinking about what they want to do with those properties when they are no longer living, we are in the process of trying to figure out how to create one of these facilities in every state in the United States. So for someone who has a property that they don't know what to do with, we would very much like to have it. Or if you want to do a charitable remainder trust to be able to have Restoration Ranch be the beneficiary. But most importantly, I would say every dollar helps. Don't think that you have to be a big super donor to help us. Every dollar helps. But more importantly, thank a first responder, thank their family, appreciate what they do for us. Because if we don't start taking care of them, they will not be there for us when we need them. They're leaving the profession in droves. And last year, more first responders died of completed suicide than died in the line of duty.
Wow.
That is acceptable.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey,
So, my friend, we have work to do.
we have work to do. I'm speechless. Oh, Catherine. My God, this is, yeah. I mean, why would anybody even want to go into that profession?
No,
It
yeah,
it's
it's a
all of the
calling.
caretaking. It's a calling. Yeah. All of the caretaking, I mean, professions. Like I was, listening to I was at a mastermind with a end of life doula who was a nurse, and she was saying they're timed on how much time they spend to give medications, and they're dinged if they take more than, I don't know, 6 minutes or something. It's
Yeah,
crazy. And yet, just like the first responders, we hold them to this standard, that
great.
they're superhuman and
Yeah,
they're just human
yeah.
like
They're just
everyone
like
else.
us. They're just like us. And
Oh,
we all like to be appreciated. We all like to know that we matter. And I can't think of a more difficult, demanding, or dangerous profession to go into than to be a first responder or a frontline medical worker. We forget how many frontline medical workers we lost during COVID.
exactly. Yeah. They were leaving in droves then as well. Oh,
Yes.
wow. I just thank you for what you're doing and thank you for sharing that. All the stories of loss that you have been through. And yet you have turned it into this. There was a hidden gift there.
There was definitely a hidden
So
gift
many.
there. And we will do another interview once I get my book out on this 12-step grief process, not 12-step like AA, but it's when I looked at why am I different than most victims, it's because I consciously went through and made choices to not let this ruin my life. And it's a process. And I want to educate people, like I said, whether it's grief with a capital G or a small g, there is a way to move through it and not get stuck in the repetitive. victimization. Oh my God, I can't get through this. I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah, there's a way out. And let's educate people on how to do that. And I know you're going to be a big part of
I am really excited about it too. Yes, absolutely. It's a movement. We're
it.
starting a
Yes,
movement that is so needed. That's-
I agree.
Wow. Catherine, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It was such a joy. And I'm so glad that our paths intersected. There are no accidents in life
No,
ever.
ever.
And I'm like,
I'm going to keep recording, even though that
yeah,
I ended the podcast.
it's
Yeah.
okay. But allowing us to do this in such a way, because like when I taught the victimology class, I literally had jaw drops through most of what I was presenting, going, what? What do you mean that happened? What do you mean? What? I was like, yes, that's why I'm here to educate you as to what the reality of the experience is
Mm.
and why I am so different from most people. And this one sweet little girl after the class walked down and was telling me about what she wants to do. And I'm like, how can I support your dreams and aspirations? And so she was telling me, and I was like, we're walking down, we get to the bottom of the stairs, and she goes, you are a badass, Catherine. Feel of that? Yes, I'm a badass. But again, everything that has happened in my life has prepared me for this moment. Just like you're being in the Stacy burst and find your voice and find your story and
Yep.
everything.
Everything.
It's
Yep.
like, this is all part of it.
No accidents. Yeah. Everything. That it was grief. That's why I ended up here doing this and
TED Talk, right?
a TED Talk.
Right. But I think once again, I just got the call for presentations for the Colorado Victims Advocacy Program. And I'm like, why they don't have people talking about grief in this is beyond me. Yeah. And I'll send you the email. And I was like, really? Oh, great. We're going to talk about sex trafficking rather than talking about how to help people recover and thrive and move forward after this life altering experience that devastated them.
Yeah.
Now,
That-
let's not focus on that. Oh, yeah, we got a real problem with sex trafficking. No shit, Sherlock.
Right.
What are you doing to help those people?
Mm.
I have a hard time with everything that happens in our life we called into. Maybe we have at a soul level, but I sure as shit didn't ask for all this stuff to happen.
Yeah.
Just like I don't believe that a woman that gets kidnapped into the sex trade really wanted that to happen. But if we taught women to stand up for themselves and to be able to find their voice and use their voice, would that change things? Oh, abso-freaking-lutely.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And one of the things I learned in a self-defense class, which just floored me, was they had a scream. Okay.
Okay.
Most people stop screaming after 15 seconds.
Mm.
Most perpetrators know that. If you scream for at least a minute, they will either run or someone will respond, because if they hear a 15-second scream, they think it was a fluke. Did I really hear that?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Try screaming for a minute. A minute is a very long.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm so excited about the book that I just like, and the educating, because I'm really passionate about this, but I don't have a step by step system. I
Yes.
have the things that worked for me, but I know there's
Right.
more. And so for
Yes.
us to cross paths is just like, yes, so
Yeah.
spirit led, just so,
And the fact that you woke up and I woke up and we both had the same thought. We need to connect. Just crazy. I'm crazy, crazy. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. Thank you for this opportunity.
oh my gosh,
You're,
yes.
you are so easy to talk with. I mean, I can't wait till we get to meet in person because we'll just like hang and talk for hours. I know. I know.
Yes.
Seriously.
Yeah,
But
thank you so much. All right.
great.
Well,
Have a great
you
weekend.
too. Yeah,
All
thank
right,
you
my
so
dear. We'll
much.
be in
All right.
touch.
We will. All right, bye.